Number 10. Ironheart. Better than Iron Man. Okay, hear me out on this one. Riri Williams is a teenage superhero genius who was able to reverse engineer an Iron Man suit by looking at Tony Stark's suit. Tony was impressed with her work and drafted her to fight alongside him in the second Marvel Civil War against Captain Marvel's forces. By the end of the war, Tony was in a coma and Riri was made Ironheart, Iron Man's successor. She used an AI of Tony to help her with the learning curve, but eventually replaced him with an AI of her own design. In her time as a superhero, she has managed to defeat a variety of supervillains and has shown herself to be close to, if not equal to, Tony Stark in raw intelligence. But why is she better? Well, it honestly has less to do with her and more to do with Tony. The original Iron Man has made a series of blunders over the years, such as forming the Illuminati, which led to an angry Hulk taking over New York. He was directly involved in starting not one but two civil wars, one of which resulted in the Avengers being disbanded and unable to prevent the Skrull invasion. He was in charge of S.H.I.E.L.D. but screwed up so hard that Norman Osborn was put in charge of national security, and he turned himself into a god and killed all of his friends after going crazy. Riri Williams is the better superhero simply because she hasn't had multiple instances of nearly destroying the world in her efforts to make it better. Number 9. Blue Beetle just keeps getting better. The original Blue Beetle was Daniel Garrett, an archaeologist who discovered a powerful artifact called the Blue Scarab. It bonded to Dan and gave him superpowers such as flight, super strength, and energy projection. He became the first Blue Beetle, but one of Dan's students, Ted Kord, took over the mantle when Dan was killed in action while trying to stop Ted's evil uncle from taking over the world. Ted couldn't get the scarab to work for him and decided to instead train himself to his physical peak and use his skills as an inventor to create vehicles and gadgets that would help him fight crime. He operated as a hero in the DC universe for years, being a member of such teams as the Birds of Prey and the Justice League until he was killed in action by the villain Maxwell Lord. The mantle of Blue Beetle survived, with the third Blue Beetle, a teenager named Jamie Reyes, finding the scarab that granted the first Blue Beetle his powers. It fused itself to his spine and gave him the abilities of flight, super strength, mechanokinesis, metamorphosis, as well as access to sound, energy, and fire manipulation weapons. Not only is he the coolest looking of the three Beetles, he is by far the most powerful, and he only gets more powerful as Jamie gets more experience as a hero. Number 8. The new Superman does what the original can't. The son of Lois Lane and Clark Kent, Jonathan Samuel Kent has been a superhero since an early age, becoming Superboy when he was 10 years old. After an incident involving a black hole, he was imprisoned by the villain Ultraman for several years before he escaped and returned to Earth. Although it had been years for him, it had only been a few weeks on Earth. The now 17-year-old was tasked by his father with protecting Earth while he went away to deal with an extraterrestrial threat, and John became the new Superman. Although one might assume that as someone who is half human and half Kryptonian, he would be weaker than a full Kryptonian, tests that were run on him before his birth by Batman revealed that his unique physiology would actually be an advantage, giving him the potential to be even more powerful than the original Man of Steel. Another way that he has more power than Kal-El is his ability to become involved in Earth's issues. As the original Superman explained to his son in Superman, Son of Kal-El #2, the reason he had refrained from involving himself more in many of Earth's issues and conflicts was that as an alien born on Krypton, he didn't feel he had the right to impose his beliefs on the people of Earth and should instead lead by example. He went on to say that as someone who was born on Earth, John could involve himself more and end up having more of a positive effect on Earth than even the original Superman. Number 7. Dick Grayson crushed it as Batman. The original Batman is one of the most beloved superheroes of all time, having used his massive brain and fortune to become the world's greatest detective and one of the world's greatest martial artists. When a young boy named Dick Grayson's parents were killed, Bruce adopted him and made him the first Robin. All of Dick's childhood was dedicated to training him to be an even better hero than Batman and to perhaps one day take over the mantle. Dick eventually became the hero Nightwing, but when Bruce was presumed dead, it became clear that a new Batman had to take his place. Several people fought over the cowl, such as Tim Drake and Jason Todd, but in the end, Dick became the new new Batman and took on Bruce's troubled son Damian as his Robin. Not only did Dick manage to live up to the mantle and keep Gotham safe, in some ways he was actually a better Batman than Bruce. He had a healthier relationship with the GCPD, where they were more comfortable around him and willing to work with him. He was able to take Damian under his wing in a way that Bruce struggled to match, and he was more open to collaboration with other heroes and members of the Bat family, something Bruce constantly struggles to do, resulting in him causing issues for everyone. When Bruce returned, he was so impressed with Dick's work that he asked him to stay on as Batman to protect Gotham while he worked on establishing Batman Inc. Although he has since gone back to being Nightwing, it's no wonder Batman considers Dick Grayson his greatest accomplishment. Number 6. Captain Marvel. More powerful than the original? Mar-Vell was a member of the alien race known as the Kree, who came to Earth and took on the identity of Dr. Walter Lawson, a scientist working at Cape Canaveral, Florida. There, he met Carol Danvers, who he developed a relationship with. He became the hero Captain Marvel, and she became Miss Marvel. The two acted as superheroes for years until Mar-Vell died of lung cancer in 1982. In the time after his death, a few different characters have taken on the Captain Marvel identity, such as his son Genis Vell and Monica Rambeau. But in 2012, Carol Danvers took on the mantle and became the new and current Captain Marvel. An element that she does better than the original Captain is her ability to work with others. While Mar-Vell would occasionally work with other heroes, he was never made an Avenger until he was posthumously granted the honor. Carol, on the other hand, has been a member of several different teams over the years, such as the Avengers, S.H.I.E.L.D., the Guardians of the Galaxy, and the Alpha Flight space program. She is also a frequent ally of the X-Men. She is a much more involved hero, and as a result has had a much bigger impact on Marvel continuity than the original Captain Marvel. Number 5. There was an original Black Canary? Black Canary is a well-loved superhero in the DC universe, but not everyone realizes that Dinah Lance was not the original hero to go by this name. Her mother, Dinah Drake, was the original Black Canary, first appearing in Flash Comics number 86 all the way back in 1947. Originally, her MO was similar to the Green Hornets, with her posing as a criminal in order to get close to and then take out criminals, but she soon abandoned this plan and became a more straightforward crime fighter. She had no powers, but was a skilled fighter and acrobat who was known for training canaries to do amazing feats. She joined the Justice Society and married a detective named Larry Lance. She eventually gave up the mantle and was replaced by her daughter, Dinah Laurel Lance, in 1969's Justice League of America number 75. The second Black Canary is far more effective than her mother, being one of the greatest martial artists on the planet, according to official canon, being evenly matched with Batman. She has a keen tactical mind, and although she doesn't train birds, she possesses the metahuman gene, which gives her her signature ability, the Canary Cry, a devastating sonic attack capable of damaging objects and hurting her enemies. Number 4. Johnny Storm's Human Torch is fantastic. The original Human Torch was a humanoid android designed by a scientist to be a perfect imitation of humanity. Due to a bizarre design flaw, whenever the android was exposed to air, he would burst into an extremely hot flame. The android achieved sentience and went on a run through the city, burning everything he touched and being unable to control his fire. He eventually learned how to control himself and became one of the most popular Marvel crime fighters of the Golden Age. He was retired as a character not long after the end of the Golden Age, and his name and power set were reused for Johnny Storm when the Fantastic Four stories began being published at the beginning of the Silver Age. He was eventually brought back, but it is fair to say that he is the more obscure version of the character, with Johnny not only being much more powerful, but much more interesting than the Jim Hammond android. Number 3. Wally West, a Generations Flash. Similar to how Dick Grayson got the Batman gig, Wally West started out as Barry Allen's sidekick, Kid Flash. When Barry Allen seemingly died in the Crisis on Infinite Earths, his old sidekick took up the mantle. Unlike other legacy characters who took on the original hero's legacy for like a year, Wally was the main Flash in DC continuity from 1986 all the way until 2009. In this time, he became a fan-favorite version of the character, being more quippy and impulsive than his mentor. Wally was so popular that when the Justice League animated series came out in 2003, Wally was the featured speedster, not Barry. In fact, when Barry was eventually brought back in 2009, many fans were quick to point out that Barry had been rewritten to have many of the personality traits that had made Wally so beloved. Number 2. Hal Jordan. Earth's greatest Green Lantern. The original Green Lantern, Alan Scott, got his powers when a mystical entity called the Starheart came to Earth and took on the shape of a lantern. It saved Alan from a train wreck and gave him the mental instructions to build himself a power ring which would create energy constructs. He became the first Green Lantern and joined the Justice Society. As the golden age of comics ended, his series was cancelled and he became somewhat obscure. 8 years after his cancellation, the title and concept of Green Lantern was reinvented and we were introduced to Hal Jordan in 1959. He was a test pilot who was chosen to join the Green Lantern Corps, a group of space cops tasked with defending the galaxy. Hal got a better look than Alan, he was given more power, and most importantly, was part of a group that lent itself to a rich and complex mythology that is much more beloved by fans than the original Golden Age version of the character. Number 1. Barry Allen was so cool he started the Silver Age. The original Flash, appearing in 1940, was Jay Garrick, a college student who accidentally inhaled heavy water vapors while taking a smoke break in his lab. This gave him his super speed, which allowed him to become the hero, the Flash. Jay's Flash was known for wearing a simple red shirt with a lightning bolt and a kettle helmet with golden wings on the sides. When Flash was reinvented in the late 50s, his new identity was Barry Allen, a crime lab scientist who was hit by lightning and doused with chemicals and became able to tap into the Speed Force. Barry was given a much more iconic costume and series of rogues to fight, and his introduction is often referred to as the start of the Silver Age of comics. In an odd move, it was revealed that in Barry's universe, the adventures of Jay Garrick were comic books that Barry read as a child, inspiring him to call himself Flash. In the iconic Flash of Two Worlds story, it was revealed that Jay actually lived in a different world in the multiverse. The comics were a result of the writer being psychically influenced by the multiverse. This was later retconned and Jay became the Flash of the World War II era rather than a semi-fictional figure. But most of what we love about the Flash was introduced not by Jay's time as the Scarlet Speedster, but Barry's. Number 10. Laura Kinney's Wolverine. The original Wolverine is one of the most popular Marvel Comics characters, having won over the world with his grumpy, fuzzy Canadianness. But here's the thing, because he is so popular and written by so many people, he has a tendency to be kind of inconsistent. At his best, Logan is tough but with a heart of gold, being capable of extreme violence but struggling with the fact that he has the potential to be a feral monster. At his worst, he is written as a psycho who is constantly picking fights with his teammates and continuously talking to no one in particular about how tough he is. His daughter, a half-clone named Laura Kinney, aka X-23, has similar powers, but is less prone to alienating her teammates, being able to get close to people a lot easier than Logan. When Logan died, she took up the Wolverine mantle for a while and managed to be just as skilled and effective, while also showing a lot more emotional maturity than her predecessor. So, while I think Logan is the more interesting character, I think the claim that he's the best there is at what he does is up for debate. Oh, and for what it's worth, when the characters first met and fought, Laura outfought and outsmarted Logan by plugging his wounds with mud so that they couldn't heal over and he would bleed out. Number 9. Connor Kent's Superboy. In 1949, the Superboy series began being published, telling the stories of a young Clark Kent and how he fought crime as Superboy before eventually growing up to be Superman. It detailed his life growing up in Smallville, fighting villains, and teaming up with the time-traveling Legion of Superheroes and Krypto the Superdog. It was a fun, campy series, but other than the character's age, there wasn't really much difference between his Superboy adventures and his Superman ones at the time. A couple continuity shakeups later, we were introduced to a new Superboy, Connor Kent. When Superman was killed by the villain Doomsday, Project Cadmus created a clone of him using a combination of Superman and Lex Luthor's DNA. Connor had slightly different powers and a teenage snark that really set him apart from the Man of Steel. And watching him navigate his complicated lineage, his desire for acceptance from Supes, his time on the Teen Titans, and his growth as a character made him a lot more interesting to read about than a young Clark Kent. I also really like the period where Superman's son, John Kent, becomes Superboy, but it was unfortunately cut very short when he was aged up. Number 8. Terry McGinnis's Batman. In the Batman Beyond television show, we were shown a futuristic Gotham City where Bruce Wayne had been forced to retire due to his advanced age. A teenager named Terry McGinnis stumbled upon the Batcave and used Bruce's futuristic Batsuit to avenge the death of his father, impressing Bruce so much that he was offered the mantle of Batman. Terry's Batman has a lot of advantages over the original Batman, being able to turn invisible and fly with rocket boots and having enhanced strength, just to name a few. Now, this comes with a huge asterisk, as the suit was designed and built by Wayne, and Terry doesn't have the same level of skill as the original Batman, which is why he's ranked relatively low on this list. But the point that I'm trying to make is that Terry's Batman has better tech in every conceivable way than every version of Bruce Wayne at his peak. Also, credit to Terry, he was able to get under the Joker's skin in a way that Bruce never would have thought to in the Return of the Joker film. Number 7. Scott Lang's Ant-Man. People have a tendency to complain about the fact that the Ant-Man movies chose to focus on Scott Lang's time as Ant-Man rather than Hank Pym's, which I don't really get, if I'm being honest. Don't get me wrong, Pym is a great character and is responsible for the creation of the tech that allows Ant-Man to shrink and grow and control ants. All that fun stuff. He first suited up as Ant-Man in 1962's Tales to Astonish number 35, but he gave up the persona and became Giant Man barely a year later in Tales to Astonish number 49. He's bounced between identities a lot, having mostly alternated between Giant Man and Yellow Jacket, but to my knowledge he never became Ant-Man again. On the other hand, Scott Lang has been suiting up as Ant-Man since 1979, and in his time in the costume has fought and defeated villains like Kang the Conqueror and Doctor Doom. He has way more quality stories than Pym does just by virtue of having stuck with the identity longer. You could absolutely debate whether or not Hank Pym is a better superhero than Scott, but if you're talking about who the better Ant-Man is, it's hard not to pick Scott. Number 6. Kyle Rayner's Green Lantern. The original Green Lantern was Alan Scott, but the most well-known is Hal Jordan. There are other Earth Green Lanterns such as Guy Gardner and John Stewart, who are both great characters who you could make the argument are better or more interesting than Hal, depending on your personal taste. But for this list, I gotta give it to Kyle Rayner. When Hal lost it and became the villain Parallax, he destroyed the entire Green Lantern Corps, and Kyle got the last ring, making him the only Green Lantern left. Kyle proved up to the task and managed to become a capable superhero and member of the Justice League. When he had to go up against Parallax, he managed to defeat Hal and save the planet. Later, when the planet was in danger again, he was the one who convinced Hal to redeem himself. Later, when the Corps was reformed, he was granted the title of Torchbearer for his efforts. He was a host for the Ion entity of Will, and was chosen by every ring on the emotional spectrum to be a member of their various corps, wielding all the rings at once. This led to him becoming the White Lantern, so while he isn't a lot of people's favorite Lantern, he has done more for the Corps than any of them. Number 5. Starman. The original Starman was Ted Knight, a wealthy scientist who created a device called the Gravity Rod, which allowed him to fly and shoot energy blasts and stuff like that. Personally, if my ability to fly depended on being able to hold a flashlight in my hand, I'd put a strap on it, kinda like a Wii controller, but maybe that's just me. Anyway, he was a hero in the Golden Age, first appearing in 1941 and being a member of the Justice Society. He had 2 sons, David and Jack, but he could be somewhat neglectful of them because of his focus on superheroics. When he retired, he passed the mantle down to his older son David, which was fine with Jack because he thought the whole thing was dumb. David was Starman for about a week before the son of the original Starman's archenemy, the Mist, shot him with a sniper rifle. At this point, Jack reluctantly took on the mantle. He redesigned the suit to be more casual and modern, and his father gave him a gravity staff to replace the rod. The story of someone reluctantly becoming a hero while trying to reconcile with an absent father is more interesting to me than anything Ted Knight got up to in the Golden Age. So I'm calling Jack the superior Starman, and if nothing else he did better than David. Number 4. Night Owl 2. Despite being introduced in the same comics at the same time, a couple of the characters in Alan Moore's Watchmen universe are legacy characters, such as the heroes going by Night Owl. The original Night Owl was a man named Hollis Mason who was a policeman in New York in the late 30s. He decided to become a vigilante and eventually joined the masked adventurer group the Minutemen. He was a good hand-to-hand fighter, but beyond that wasn't the most impressive hero. After he retired, a man named Dan Dryberg, who had inherited a large amount of money, wrote to him and asked for permission to take up the mantle. Dan was a genius inventor, having a variety of gadgets like night vision goggles, a more advanced suit, and his owl ship, tip, Archie. He trained with Hollis to be just as good of a martial artist, and the two became good friends until Hollis' death. Considering how much more advanced Night Owl 2 is in every sense of the word, it's hard not to consider him the superior crime fighter. Number 3. Amadeus Cho's Hulk. Amadeus Cho is a brilliant scientist not dissimilar to Bruce Banner, who is considered the 6th smartest man alive in the Marvel Universe. He worked alongside several heroes in the decade before he became Hulk, but Banner was the first he helped. That made it very fitting when he was forced to use special nanites to absorb the Hulk's powers. This turned him into a new Hulk. But unlike Banner, who suffers from severe DID, and as a result has several different and very dangerous angry Hulks inside of him, Cho was able to keep his Hulk side relatively under control, priding himself at being a better and smarter Hulk than Banner. Now, if I was an Avenger, I would feel a lot better with Cho on my team than the unpredictable Banner. So I really do think that Cho's Hulk is the better hero, due to him rarely losing control. But setting aside the logic of who would realistically be the better hero, who wants to read a Hulk comic where he doesn't lose control? Banner is by far the more interesting of the two characters, even if Cho is a better fit for teams like the Avengers. Number 2. Tim Drake's Robin. Several people have taken on the mantle of Robin the Boy Wonder over the years, with the original being Dick Grayson. Dick operated as Robin for decades in the comics before he was finally allowed to grow up. In story, he and Batman grew apart and were having a lot of personality conflicts, so Robin quit and eventually became Nightwing. He was replaced by Jason Todd, who was a street kid Batman caught stealing the tires off the Batmobile. Jason became Robin but was never as skilled as Dick, and had a tendency to be overly aggressive and to clash with the Dark Knight, frequently disobeying orders and eventually being killed by the Joker. After this, a kid named Tim Drake realized that Batman in his grief was becoming more and more violent and reckless, and decided that Batman needed a Robin to help temper his aggression. Tim became Robin and took to the role flawlessly. Now that Tim has been replaced by Damian Wayne and has become his own hero, you could make the argument that he is not as skilled a solo hero as Dick's Nightwing or Jason's Red Hood, but as far as which of the Robins has worked the best with Batman, Tim stands above the rest, with even the original Dick Grayson having admitted that Tim was the best of the Robins. Plus, his Robin costume was a massive improvement on the classic no pants and pixie boots look both Dick and Jason had worn during their times as Robin. Number 1. Zatanna. As she is such a staple of the DC universe, albeit an extremely underrated staple, a lot of fans might not even realize that Zatanna the Magician is a legacy character. Her father, Giovanni Zatara, made his first appearance in Action Comics number 1, the same issue that featured the first appearance of Superman. Like his daughter, he performs as a stage magician, but is an actual magic wielder who is able to cast spells by speaking his incantations backwards. He uses these abilities to fight crime and do the whole superhero thing. Zatanna took a similar path as her father, but was more popular with readers. Due to her father having been dead in the comics for several years and therefore rarely showing up, and her being much easier on the eyes, not many people seek out her father's adventures, instead choosing to focus on his progeny, one of the most popular legacy characters in comics.
Number 10. Maximus the Mad. I just like the look of Maximus the Mad here. We don't get to see too much of him or the other Inhumans, but what I like about him and them is kind of just that. They're more alluring when they're kept mysterious. Maximus, in case you didn't know, is the brother to Black Bolt. In the Earth 616 universe, he is known as Maximus the Mad, as I believe he's also known here. He is often depicted as such in terms of his appearance in the 616 continuity, and is also made to look somewhat more flamboyant in comparison to his Earth 1610, his Ultimate Universe counterpart. I do love that Maximus just looks like a normal dude in the Ultimate Universe, because also I just feel like just because you're mad doesn't mean you look different, you know what I mean? You just look normal. I think that actually makes him more frightening to me as well, that he just looks so normal, so average, especially among the rest of the Inhumans, who all look pretty freaky, stand out, and honestly somewhat monstrous here. This more bleak take on the whole group in the Ultimate Universe makes me want to see a film version of them that was more of like a supernatural horror, especially considering they consider Attilan to actually be like a heaven here, yet it's so dark. I believe based on this depiction, there could be promise in something like a supernatural horror film version of them. Number 9. Gregory Gregory Stark. Sorry Arno, move over, Gregory is here. I like Arno Stark, okay, but Gregory was a pretty cool villain to have, and he wasn't the secret brother of Iron Man either. Gregory is actually not just known, he's often more well liked than Tony is in the Ultimate Universe, at least initially. Tony is seen as being a bit of a loose cannon in comparison to his older twin brother, you see, who constantly has things way more together and is also super wicked smart. But that also works well for Gregory's character, as he also turns out to be, you guessed it, a bad guy. Of course, no one can be that good. We should have known. Gregory manipulated S.H.I.E.L.D. in order to get full control of it, and when all the pieces were in play, basically attempted to take over the world. He had to be taken out by Tony Stark, but in a much more permanent way than Tony when he dealt with Arno in the Earth 616 reality. Tony, in part, actually helped to kill his brother. He used an EMP to disrupt his nanites, which made Gregory critically vulnerable to an attack from Thor. Ouch. Number 8. Crystal. I really love the original Crystal, especially in terms of her appearance, but I also do love the super rebellious vibes we get from Earth 1610 Ultimate Crystal in this narrative. Here Crystal is still the little sister of Medusa, but this group of Inhumans, Medusa included, are even less likely to mingle with humans. They simply want to live a completely separate and simple life, which bothers Crystal, who it seems is searching for something more, something outside of her own family. Acting out, she runs away from her people, not eager to play the loyal member of the royal court, and not fond of her fiance, Black Bolt's brother, Maximus the Mad. Yeah, they're engaged in this reality. She runs into the Fantastic Four, and in so doing kind of reveals to them the secret location of Attilan as they pursue her after she is retrieved by her people. Crystal ends up deciding to stay with the Inhumans too, despite her unhappiness, which I also think is an interesting choice, and it gets me wanting to know more about both Crystal and the Inhumans in this universe. Cause like the Fantastic Four were also just like, you come chill with us, but she's like, nah, this is how it's gotta be, even though I definitely was not super here for this, but I still gotta stick with my fam. Number 7. Nick Fury. The Nick Fury of the Ultimate Universe Earth 1610 isn't perfect. In fact, he can kinda seem like he's being a butt a lot of the time, but in reality it's just that Nick Fury often doesn't trust people. He keeps his plans and reasons behind them close to his chest, and while you might not understand them and therefore think he's callous, he's often just trying to make the hard call. Nick Fury has some flaws, I'll grant you, especially if we're talking about his relationship with his ex-wife and everything that apparently went wrong there. But this version of the character would become so beloved that he actually go on to inspire an Earth 616 counterpart in Nick Fury Jr., and of course would inspire the version of the character we saw up on the big screen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where he was portrayed by the one and only Samuel L. Jackson. Samuel L. Jackson in fact also served as inspiration for the 1610 counterpart in the comics when it came to his appearance, and Mr. Jackson was actually the character's first pick, of course, when asked in canon who would be best to portray him in a film. Number 6. Black Bolt. Black Bolt is already menacing over on Earth 616, at least I would say in modern comics he is, but on Earth 1610 he is really menacing. We see Black Bolt for an even shorter time than Crystal, but honestly it only adds to the mystery of the character, making him appear more intimidating. The colors by June Chung during his appearance in Ultimate Fantastic Four Annual Issue Number 1 really help the character to pop as well, and the pencils by Jay Lee also add to the presence of his appearance. He might not say much, but he really doesn't need to here. This is a very muscular, dark, and yet blindingly bright Black Bolt with the white lines of his costume reminding me of lightning. Black Bolt simply appears basically to destroy Attilan so they might find a new secret home, as their current one in the Himalayas has been revealed to the FF, and you know, it's supposed to be secret. Aside from that, he also communicates how disappointed he is in Crystal. Honestly, I would not want this Black Bolt to be disappointed in me. I would be like walking on eggshells with him if he was like, I'm slightly disappointed in you, Amanda. Or you know, just stared at me and looked disappointed, because he couldn't really say that. He can only shout, well, he does shout to destroy Attilan, basically that he's disappointed, so there you go. Even the rebellious Crystal seems to be affected by Black Bolt's guilt tripping though, agreeing to remain with her people despite being offered a place among the humans and the Fantastic Four. I mean, he doesn't even shout to destroy Attilan. What am I saying? He like just says a word. That's also how powerful this version of him is. He's like, I'll just say a word, Crystal, your disappointment, and then it all just wipes away. Number 5, Medusa. Honestly, I would say pretty much all of the Inhumans at this point of the Ultimate Universe are the coolest versions around, hence why I have so many of them on this list, or at least, you know, one of the coolest versions of the Inhumans around. I would say the coolest though. I think they are the coolest. Medusa is no exception, possibly having my most favorite redesign when it comes to her character. The Medusa of Earth 1610 is still Black Bolt's queen, but seems to have been named for her familiarity and appearance to the Gorgon of Mythos. Medusa. This version of Medusa has snakes for hair. She also happens to be steadfastly loyal to her people. As I said before, we don't get to see too much of the Inhumans, but we do know that Medusa believes the Inhumans are basically superior to humans, and that distance should be maintained between their race and the humans in order to basically preserve their own culture and their own abilities. Medusa also expresses here that she has come to love her husband and accept him for who he is, despite the fact that he can never really show his love for her, at least not vocally. Which apparently is like a really big thorn in her side, because she seems to be very upset about it. She's like, Crystal, get over the fact that you don't want to hang out with us. Like, Black Bolt can't even talk to me, okay? If I can deal with that, you can deal with Maximus, okay? Let's just figure it out. Number 4, Hawkeye. Hawkeye actually has to be one of the coolest heroes in these comics, and no, I am not joking. The way they revamped this character was so impactful that the version of the character was a major influence on their MCU counterpart when it came time to pen down what that Hawkeye would be like. Clint Barton in the comics is known for being a hot mess typically, but in the Ultimate Universe, he was much more secretive, but also had a family. Tragically, his family ends up being found and killed in the process of enemies trying to hunt him down. When he is captured and severely mistreated by said captors, what does he do? He doesn't hang his head, he doesn't give up, he escapes, using his fingernails, his freaking fingernails as weapons. It doesn't get more badass than that. This Hawkeye does not even need arrows to be a deadly threat. I don't often get to hype Hawkeye here on Top 10 Nerd, so I just want to say thank you, Ultimate Universe, for giving me an opportunity to do so, because I do like Clint Barton, but we don't often get to put him at the top of these lists, or near the top, so yay. Number 3, Miles Morales. I know this is kind of a hot take when it comes to Spider-Man. I know there's some people in the comments who are gonna be like, I think Peter Parker is the best version. And that's fine, that's fair enough. But I really love Miles Morales in this role. Now, we do also have a Peter Parker in the Ultimate Universe of 1610, but he doesn't really do much to stand out for me in comparison to his main continuity counterpart. And don't get me wrong, I do love Peter Parker, but Miles is kind of like a breath of fresh air in some ways in comparison to the age-old hero. Why? Well, Peter has a tendency to be like really hard on himself, and aside from that, he's surrounded by tragedy at times. Honestly, there are runs where it feels like every time Peter like turns a corner, a new tragedy might just be like awaiting him around that corner. Miles actually has a family still living, and while he did lose his mom in the Ultimate Universe, it never really felt like a constant, unresolved loss, like the death of Peter's Uncle Ben or his first love Gwen Stacy on Earth 616. And Rio, Miles' mom, is actually back now that the 1610 Miles has been permanently displaced, taking up residence in the 616 reality, and his family obviously is there with him. Miles also just has super cool powers. On top of much of what Peter has going on, Miles can also camouflage himself, and he has Venom Blast powers, so gotta give it to him. Sorry. Number 2, Gwen Stacy. Gwen Stacy is such an underrated character in the Marvel Ultimate Universe. On the Earth of 616, Gwen is, well, she's dead. Or she's probably dead. She might be showing up again soon, apparently, but it's probably a clone or like a trick or something. I don't believe it's the original Gwen Stacy. She's been dead and gone for many years. I don't think she's ever really gonna come back. In the Ultimate Universe, Gwen also kinda dies, but also kinda doesn't. She's killed by Carnage, not an alien symbiote, but kind of a lab-made one in this reality, and in essence, her consciousness becomes merged with it, meaning that Carnage becomes Gwen, and Gwen becomes Carnage. So yeah, as freaky as that sounds, in the Ultimate reality, Gwen Stacy lives on as Carnage. It's freaky, and it's cool. Well, you might think this is the same as a clone Gwen in the 616 universe. It's not really. Because 1, she has the power of Carnage, and 2, she is an 100% exact biological duplicate who also possesses Gwen's mind up to the point of her death, which, you know, not all Gwen clones in 616 have, allowing Gwen to continue to grow and develop as she would have as a human, but simply with superpowers. Well, She only has superpowers for a bit, sadly. She has them until Eddie Brock's Venom assimilates Carnage, leaving her devoid of the symbiote and her powers going forward. I kinda wish she had stayed as Carnage, but it's fine. When she was Carnage though, I think that was super cool. Even though I know it was freaking her out, I thought she could have maybe become the new Carnage. That would have been neat. Number 1, The Maker. The Maker is the alternate version of Reed Richards. I actually have always felt that Richards might make a better villain than a hero, and The Maker seems to have been this thought made manifest. Living proof. Well, you know, fictional living proof. The Maker initially started out as a hero, leader of the team known as the Fantastic Four. However, in the Ultimate Universe, his and Sue's future of marital bliss was not as much guaranteed. And in fact, after the tragedy of Ultimatum and Sue Storm turning down his marriage proposal, Richards got a different perspective on life, which inevitably turned him into a villain. In this universe, Reed had a rough childhood, and part of where his villainy started was in turning on his family. A family that had mistreated him as he saw it for years. Yeah, in this reality, Reed commits patricide and matricide to get back at his parents. Very counter to his Earth 616 alternate, and that version's relationship with his family, which much better than this one. Number 10, Jessica Drew. Jessica Drew is very different from her 616 counterpart. Now, while I personally prefer the 616 Jessica Drew as she's one of my favorite spider people of all time, I can understand why others might find the ultimate version of the character more intriguing. This version of Jessica Drew is not her own person. Quite the opposite. She is in fact a female clone of Peter Parker. She shares Peter's memories and even his feelings, which means that she too cares for Mary Jane as Peter did. She was created to be used as a weapon by the CIA, but before they could wipe her mind to clear out all of Peter's memories, which she shared, she and the fellow clones who were created alongside her escaped. With all the other clones also sharing Peter's memories, Jessica attempted to dissuade them from interfering in Peter's life, but ultimately failed in this regard. In the end, she would team up with Spider-Man to help him try and find Mary Jane, who it turned out had been kidnapped by Kane, another of Peter's clones, whose ultimate self was also known as the imperfect or flawed clone, just as he is in 616. Number 9, Carol Danvers. Alas, this Carol Danvers doesn't have powers, like her 616 counterpart Captain Marvel, formerly known as Miss Marvel, does, but that doesn't make Carol any less awesome here. In fact, some would likely believe that the character actually might be improved without her cosmic abilities and her Kree heritage. This Carol Danvers is a high-ranking S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who would actually go on to become a replacement to the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury. To me, she embodies a lot of the military and tactical elements of Carol and possibly highlights those even more. Although sadly, she's not a pilot like Carol is on Earth 616. Carol would go on to lead the New Ultimates, and after her time with S.H.I.E.L.D. would actually become the chief of staff for the president, initially serving President Howard and afterwards greatly helping Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, when he became president thereafter. Number 8, Galactus. While Galactus is an iconic antagonist on Earth 616, the unique take on the often supervillain and supremely powerful cosmic being was a refreshing one. Here, Galactus was still a global threat, but as opposed to being a giant cosmically powered man who can sometimes, let's be honest, be reasoned with and defeated that way, this version of the villain was a group of deadly drones that were less easily reasoned with. After coming to the reality of Earth 616, this group of drones, which once threatened the Earth of the Ultimate Universe, threatened instead the whole universe of Earth 1610 when they met and merged with the Galactus of the main continuity. Galactus of Earth 616 decided to make the Galactus his heralds, resulting in a deadly combination. Number 7, the Liberators. The Liberators are basically a more politically inspired version of the Masters of Evil, a more serious take on that villainous group. They're made up from heroes of various international rival nations who basically seek to destroy the Ultimates because they feel the US has an unfair advantage and needs to be put in their place. The crazy part is that a lot of their beef feels pretty justified and serves to expose some of the flaws in American nationalism throughout the story involving them, despite those like Captain America and the Ultimates being the heroes of that story, while the Liberators are still technically very much the villains. Number 6, Green Goblin. While not everyone is as big a fan of this version of Green Goblin, I for one am a pretty big fan. In the Ultimate Universe, Norman Osborn more literally mutated into a Green Goblin, a giant hulking green figure who is seemingly unstoppable and even suggested to be immortal. Not only that, but this version of Osborn was directly tied to Spider-Man, as it was his own formula that granted Peter his spider-like powers and abilities. Maybe not for everyone, but I think that is pretty cool. And sure, this Goblin wasn't stealthy in most cases in comparison to his 616 version, but he definitely comes across as more menacing and intimidating from a physical standpoint at least. Number 5. Kitty Pryde. Once again, it is hard for me to say that I love the Ultimate Kitty Pryde more than the main continuity Kate Pryde of Earth 616, as I really love her dearly. But I will say that I think Ultimate Kitty Pryde had a lot of awesome stuff to offer, and that while still staying true to the heart of the character, differentiated her enough from her 616 self. And I really appreciate that, especially as a Pryde fan. Kitty in the Ultimate Universe was known for being headstrong and strong-willed. Despite her mom getting a promise from Professor X that Kitty, if enrolled in his school, would not go out on any X missions, Kitty was stubborn and snuck aboard the Blackbird to do so anyways. She would prove herself to be a formidable leader who many mutants looked up to over the years, and for a time would also be a close friend and even romantic partner of Spider-Man. The two would date and fight crime together. It was pretty cute. There is honestly a lot to love about the Ultimate Kitty Pryde. Number 4. Ben Grimm. As opposed to Ben Grimm, the college friend and roommate of Reed Richards, these two became friends when they were little kids and remained close throughout middle school. Just like in the 616 version of this story, Ben Grimm was a strong, athletic type who became the star of the football team, known by the nickname the Grim Reaper. However, it was also at this time that Reed was teased and mistreated a lot in school by other students because of his brilliant and unique mind, which made him stand out. Grimm stood up for Reed though and looked out for him, and in exchange, Richards would help Ben with his homework. Eventually, Reed would be recruited to working for the Baxter Building at a young age, and the two would be split up until years later when Grimm appeared to be in the Nevada desert, near Reed's test area for his end zone experiment. Grimm joined Reed and the rest of his team, including Sue, Johnny, and Victor Van Dam, and witnessed the test, and as a result was changed forever. This version of Ben has a much more solid trajectory of accepting what he's become after he's transformed into the Thing, and although initially Sue and Reed are closer, eventually Reed ends up the odd man out, and Ben and Sue even end up together romantically, with Sue even proposing to Ben. Number 3. Silver Sable. Silver Sable has a somewhat darker origin story, if that's possible, in the Ultimate Universe. Instead of losing her mother and wanting to avenge her death, the young girl was often left to be raised by her mother, who frequently mistreated her. While she didn't know growing up, the truth that her father was absent was that he hunted down former World War II German soldiers, those who did awful things and were considered on the wrong side of the war. While on Earth 616, Silver Sable knew this and begged her father to train her. In the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, she didn't know of her father's true line of work until he was on his deathbed. She was brought by his associates to see him one last time, and he told her the truth about his work and apologized for not being there for her. With his dying breath, he said he wished he had had more time to teach her everything he knew. This inspired Silver Sable to follow in his footsteps, becoming a mercenary who used the money from her jobs to fund her own work and becoming the leader of the Wild Pack. Number 2. Betty Ross. In the Ultimate reality, it is Betty Ross and not Jennifer Walters who is She-Hulk. I don't think I prefer Betty's She-Hulk to Jen's She-Hulk per se, but I definitely prefer this version of Betty to the one from the main continuity of Earth 616. In this version of the story, Betty Ross fell for Bruce Banner shortly after college, but a wedge was driven between them when Bruce's work on recreating the Super Soldier Serum and his obsession with testing on himself resulted in him being transformed into the Hulk. However, when director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Nick Fury planned to use Wolverine to hunt down the Hulk and eliminate him, Betty Ross decided she had to do something. While she didn't have the rank or clearance to really interfere with the decision and the mission, and she was unable to convince the other heroes to help her, she took matters into her own hands by stealing a non-rage-inducing version of the Hulk formula made by Jennifer Walters. Betty took this formula herself in pursuit of the Hulk and Wolverine and was transformed into the She-Hulk. Number Number 1. Colossus. As with many other characters on our list, Colossus of the Ultimate Universe had a much more tragic upbringing than his 616 counterpart. On our 616, Colossus grew up on a collective farm in Russia, spending much of his spare time painting when not working on the farm, a talent he showed great affinity for. However, in the 1610 version of the character's origin, Colossus's Pyotr Rasputin fought in the Cold War, where the secret that he was a mutant was revealed to Anatol Spichkin. Spichkin promised Pyotr work should he ever need, and agreed to keep his secret. In this reality, Colossus's skin turns to steel, but it doesn't really come with super strength, so to work for Anatol he would take a drug known as Banshee to grant himself super strength to go along with his skin's durability. This Colossus is also gay, but spends most of his life in the closet in regards to this. When his father first found out, he was ashamed of Pyotr, and as such Pyotr has struggled most of his life, worried about the secret of his sexual orientation being revealed. His story is uplifting and empowering, and while different, is possibly even better than the 616 narrative for Colossus.
Coming in at number 10 is Aunt May. Although extremely warm and caring, Aunt May in the 616 reality has often been portrayed as a somewhat bland, weak, and incredibly helpless character. Aunt May is constantly having health issues, and she's constantly worrying about Peter Parker because he's such a fragile boy. After half a century of development, the most exciting thing Aunt May has done in The Amazing Spider-Man is almost marrying Dr. Octopus. She's sweet, but I think we can do better. No offense. In the Ultimate Universe, Aunt May gets an overhaul. She's quicker, wittier, and a stronger character overall. When she finally figures out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, she handles it like anyone would, with disappointment and anger that her closest family member didn't trust her enough to tell her. After a short while, Aunt May finally accepts the fact that her nephew is one of the world's greatest superheroes. After his true identity is revealed, Aunt May becomes someone Peter Parker looks to for advice and ultimately becomes the mother he never had, which is what she should have been. Number 9. Professor X. Professor X in the Ultimate Universe is the most powerful telepath on Earth, possessing vast psionic abilities, and was known as one of the most powerful mutants ever. His mutation abilities give him telepathy, astral projection, and this version experiences some telekinetic skills as well, which is different from the 616 version. But honestly, he's here because he is just a little bit morally corrupt. He does things here in the name of the greater good that his 616 self wouldn't dare. There is an obvious example when we look at what happened with Iceman. Bobby was dating a girl at the time when he was inducted into the X-Men. Now this girl had the potential to convince Bobby to leave the X-Men, and Professor X did not like that. He used his powers to erase the memory of Bobby's girlfriend from his mind, just to keep Iceman on the team. He does things like this on the regular, and they often come back to bite him in the butt, which adds a layer to his character and storytelling which I personally find fun to explore. Number 8. Thor. This one may be purely based on the costume over everything else. It was an incredibly power-evoking style change that still called back to the original while trimming the unnecessary extras. But the other interesting thing that this version of Thor brings is a whole question over whether he is in fact a god or not. His full name in the Ultimate Universe is Thorleif Gullman, and he suffered a nervous breakdown before his 30th birthday and began having delusions of Asgard. He was drafted to a project at the Dome that was trying to recreate the super soldier serum that created Captain America, but instead they went the biomechanical route and created a harness that provided the wearer with the abilities of flight, super strength, and limited invulnerability. Now Thorleif Gullman, selected as the test subject, was fitted with the suit, but during the testing process he started ranting about how he now believed he was actually the Norse god of thunder, like actually. For most of the Ultimate series it was on the fence until the very end, when it was finally confirmed that he was in fact the real Thor, marooned to Midgard with amnesia thanks to Loki's schemes. It's an interesting take on the character, and I think it's kinda cool. I like it. Number 7. Rogue. Similar to her Prime Universe version, Rogue, or Marion Carlisle, drains the life force and absorbs the memories and abilities of others through skin-to-skin contact, with the caveat being that she can end someone's life if she holds on too long. In the Ultimate Universe, Rogue actually gets picked up by the Weapon X program and is trained to use her abilities as an assassin. In the Prime Universe, it turns out using her powers on a mutant to the point of ending their life will actually permanently transfer these powers over to Rogue. This happened twice. first time was with Gambit. She drained his life force when he was already near the end after a fight with the mutant Juggernaut, and she gained his kinetic energy manipulation abilities plus, sometimes, his accent. The second time she did this, she drained the powers of Juggernaut himself when he was near death, gaining his abilities permanently, giving her the strength to throw cars, the durability to withstand demolishing buildings, super speed, and limitless stamina. Seeing Rogue wielding both Gambit's and Juggernaut's powers is strange, and yet very awesome. Number 6. Nightcrawler. Much like Rogue, the Ultimate Universe Kurt Wagner was kidnapped from Germany by Weapon X and brutally trained as one of their agents. But none of the brutal mistreatment dampened his spirits. He still remained true to his faith and even stopped Storm from killing the Weapon X commander. He was decidedly more serious than his main universe counterpart, and while some may not like that, I think it works here. I don't know. He struggled with his obvious physical differences, which made him lonely to the point of kidnapping Dazzler to manipulate her into falling in love with him. That part's not so great, but he did overcome his homophobia to be able to accept Colossus, which wins him a whole bunch of points. Also, his costume and overall look was just way better in my opinion, I don't know. Number 5. Captain America. Time to get controversial. Alright, look, many people hate that the Ultimate Universe turned Captain America into a nationalist, someone who would cheat, and someone who could criticize France. That's not what 616 Captain America would do, it's true, but this ain't 616, this is 1610, and here, things are a little bit more realistic. Sorry. The guy who runs around with the stars and stripes being a bit of a jerk from time to time? Hardly the worst offense in this world. The writers may have cleverly tried to embed the mindset of a common white man of his era and time, and I think they achieved that, even if fans hated it. This version of Captain America, while also being a bit of a jerk, is actually superhuman, as opposed to being just a peak level human being, which has him perform some pretty awesome feats. This power boost mixed with the fact that he is very willing to cheat and bend the rules to get the job done, he is a powerful character and should be as feared as he is respected. Maybe he isn't better in terms of morals or being a great guy, but he's what a real Cap would probably be like in my cynical brain, and in terms of sheer strength and power, I think he most definitely is better. Number 4. Mr. Sinister. Look, his Ultimate Universe version may not have the wow factor that his 616 self might, but in the Ultimate X-Men arc, The Tempest, the sorta goofy looking Victorian geneticist in a Liberace collar, Mr. Sinister, is reimagined as a schizophrenic street thug with a white tank top, weird tattoos, and a hat. And he's gunning down mutants to please his Lord Apocalypse, who isn't actually real and is actually an effigy Sinister has constructed out of trash. 4 issues of the X-Men chasing down a delusional mutant murderer were some of the best from the X-Men extended run in the Ultimate Universe in my opinion. Number 3. Magneto. The Ultimate Universe Magneto moves backwards away from the anti-hero crafted by Chris Claremont and back towards a return to the genocidal, aspiring dictator originally written by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And I'd say that he gets there quite successfully. In the first volume of Ultimate X-Men, Magneto attacks Washington DC with reprogrammed Sentinels, massacring civilians while having President George W. Bush stripped to nothingness groveling at his feet. He is utterly insane and completely terrifying, which could be seen as a negative by fans of his anti-hero persona, or, if you're like me, it's a giant win for a villain to be truly hateable and terrifying. Either way, this comes to its head in the divisive Ultimatum, where Magneto drowns New York City and kills dozens of heroes, including his old friend Professor X, when he reverses the polarity of the Earth in an insane show of power that sets the Ultimatum wave loose on the world. Number 2. Red Skull. In the Ultimate Universe, Steve Rogers and a girlfriend at the time, Gail Richards, shared a night together in 1945 before he went and got himself popsicled. 9 months later, out popped a baby that the government decided needed to be kept a secret. They took the boy into foster care on a military base, training him to become a super soldier to replace his father. He soon became stronger and more tactically skillful than Captain America, even though he seemed to be a perfect soldier. Rogers' son had been carefully planning his escape. Fast forward to 1963 when he was finally at the age of 17. the sun went off the handle, de-lifing all the doctors and soldiers at the facility. He also used the kitchen knife to carve the skin from his head, officially and literally becoming the Red Skull. In rebellion against the system that created him, Red Skull was the one who planned President John F. Kennedy's send-off to the grave. He becomes a mentally unstable assassin and tries to eventually steal Reed Richards' plans for the Cosmic Cube in order to use it to change history so he could grow up with his father. It's just a way better backstory for a Red Skull, in my opinion. And at number 1, it is Peter Parker. For a lot of people, Brian Michael Bendis' legendary Ultimate Spider-Man run, the one that kicked off the whole Ultimate Universe, is among the best of the best Spider-Man runs ever. Peter Parker is a modern day 15-year-old, still trying to balance his life as a teenager and his life as a superhero. What's different from this version when compared to the Amazing Spider-Man is that Peter Parker's life is much more relatable and digestible for anyone born in the past 25 years. For starters, Peter isn't a photographer when he first starts at the Daily Bugle. Being a tech-savvy teenager, our hero is one of the Daily Bugle's top web designers. J. Jonah Jameson also isn't a bumbling buffoon. He's a battle-tested, competent newspaper editor that's well aware of how to handle his staff. Spider-Man's interactions with other heroes are a bit more grounded in Ultimate Spider-Man, as well as his love life being much more entertaining and realistic. Whether it's Kitty Pryde or Mary Jane Watson, Peter Parker's love life never has a dull moment. Even Spider-Man's physical appearance makes more sense. Peter Parker has the build of a realistic nerdy teenager, and the costume's huge bug-eyed lenses make for the perfect representation of a youthful hero. And we haven't even mentioned his humor yet! One of the best scenes in any Spidey comic comes when Ultimate Spider-Man's version of the hero goes toe-to-toe with the Kingpin for the first time. During the battle, old Webhead pulls out note cards filled with fat jokes mocking Wilson Fisk's size. Like, come on, it's great.
At number 10 we have Throg. This guy deserves a spot on the list mainly for the meme, but also because it's one of the iterations of Thor that doesn't take itself too seriously. For those who don't already know, this is obviously a trick played by Loki to humiliate his brother Thor. In Thor number 365, Throg makes his first appearance when Loki decides he wants to get a laugh out of his otherwise very serious and stoic brother. But this isn't the last time we see him. In an issue of What If that plays out if the X-Men stayed on Asgard, a Thorified version of Storm faces off against Throg for the glory of Asgard, which is pretty bonkers. I mean, you know how what ifs can be, right? It's definitely a bizarre moment that's probably meant for a laugh more than anything else. But believe it or not, this still isn't the last time Throg makes an appearance. We see him yet again in Lockjaw and the Pet Avengers #1 in 2009 alongside other animal versions of the Avengers. I guess readers just couldn't get enough of the little guy. He must have been rated pretty well because he just keeps coming back. He's funny looking. At number 9 we have Ultimate Thor. Being a pretty controversial set of comics, the Ultimate series sets the stage for some fun new characters, as uncanny and overly dark as they can sometimes be. But Thor's variant in the series is anything but a miss. Originally dismissed by his teammates on the Ultimates as being crazy, this version of Thor unusually feels the need to prove himself to them in order to gain their trust and respect as the God of Thunder. He's got almost the same powers as the Earth 616 Thor, but he's rocking a different look that's pretty cool, and also a magical belt that he wears which seems to give him a boost of power. He also holds an axe instead of a hammer, which I just think is a pretty cool touch to have him stand out from his 616 counterpart. At number 8 we've got Thor 2099, where this world's Thor is actually a priest named Cecil McAdams, who is part of a religion devoted solely to the original Thor, who had lived 100 years before by this point. What's bizarre about this character is that he doesn't actually come by Thor's powers naturally. His abilities are granted to him by the CEO of the Alchemax Corporation, who has convinced him that he's a Norse god. It's actually a pretty dark reality playing out during the series, with most of the world being run by corporations and greedy multimillionaires. And on top of all that, genuine superheroes are pretty scarce during these times, unless they're created synthetically like McAdams is. Although it sounds like I'm basically just outing this guy as a fraud, he's still still means entirely well, and he's passionate about Norse mythology. What I find really cool about this character is that he's become a superhero through passion and obsession with the real Thor, which sort of turns him into a pretty genuinely powerful and motivated variant, especially since he fully believes he's the real deal. At number 7 is Thor, Herald of Galactus. This one doesn't need much explanation for those who already know the role of the Herald of Galactus, but basically Galactus is this enormous cosmic being that has an insatiable hunger for planets. So he goes around consuming them with absolutely zero remorse. But even a being as gigantic and powerful as Galactus needs some help to get his destructive work done. So he always has someone called a Herald that helps guide him through the cosmos and find the next planets for him to consume. In exchange, the Heralds are granted ownership over the power cosmic, which basically gives them a fraction of Galactus' power, which even a fraction is a ton if you know Galactus. With the power cosmic, the Herald is then able to travel at immeasurable speeds through the cosmos and harness almost limitless power in order to fulfill their duties. And at one point, Thor is chosen as the next Herald. His costume changes to something much darker and even cooler in some ways, and also if you imagine Thor's powers paired with the effects of the aforementioned power cosmic, then you can also imagine why this variant deserved a spot on this list in terms of power as well. At number 6 is Iron Hammer. This is such a cool variant because he answers the question, what would happen if Thor and Iron Man combined their abilities into one hero? When Gamora manipulates the souls of the Marvel Universe and mixes them all together, she ends up creating a whole new world called Warp World. Sounds kind of fun, doesn't it? It sounds like the name of a crappy small town arcade, and we all know those are always the best ones. But it is far from that. It's actually a universe where every soul is combined with another within the Marvel Universe. This event basically creates a mixture of Thor and Iron Man, aka Stark Odinson, son of Howard Odin. Riveting bit of writing right there. Basically, this variant ends up with a pretty cool new look as well as a brand new set of capabilities that basically combine Iron Man's wit and intelligence with Thor's supreme godlike power. I mean, even if this was just Iron Man wielding Mjolnir, it would be cool enough, but part of Thor is still in there somewhere, which makes it even more insane to imagine how powerful this variant could be. At number 5 is Beta Ray Bill. This guy is a very aggressive but also very respectable Thor variant. He sort of just butts into Thor's life and takes his title without even so much as a conversation first. It's sort of funny actually. They start as rivals and quickly become friends when they realize they pretty much match each other's power levels almost identically. Basically, Beta Ray Bill is a champion from his own world of Corbin, and when it's tragically destroyed by Searcher, he is forced to go on a pilgrimage to find a new home with a group of his own kind. And guess where they end up? They end up in the Milky Way. But as he's entering Thor's airspace, Thor decides it's kind of his duty to go and check in on the caravan with no intention to do any harm, just to check. But Thor's motivations are totally misunderstood by Beta Ray Bill, and he decides to launch a counterattack, thinking Thor is approaching aggressively. They both fight and the battle ends with actually a victory for Beta Ray Bill, who then promptly picks up Thor's hammer without issue. This comes as an absolute shock to Thor and everyone else because this has otherwise been an extremely uncommon occurrence up to this point. Thankfully for Thor, Odin rules that instead of offering Mjolnir to Beta Ray Bill, he would instead craft a whole new weapon for the Corbinite called Stormbreaker. After all this is settled, Beta Ray Bill actually ends up becoming a friend of Thor's and even steps in for the God of Thunder when he's out of town or out of commission. At number 4, we have Old King Thor. This version of the God of Thunder is basically an older, futuristic version of the 616 counterpart we're used to. Hailing from Earth 14412, this version of Thor is the All-Father and ruler of Asgard as we currently know Odin to be. His look is pretty intimidating, having a more advanced and seemingly fortified armor as well as only one eye. The eye is missing because similarly to his father, Odin, he too gave his eye in exchange for all the knowledge in the 9 realms. On top of all that, Old King Thor seems to have refined and perfected all of his abilities, meaning that it could be pretty easily argued that this version of Thor is in fact better than the original. In terms of power levels at least. And I think it's also always helpful for a hero to have more wisdom as well, which we can all safely say old King Thor has in droves. I mean, just look at him. Although to be fair to Thor 616, it's sort of known that old King Thor is just an older version of 616 Thor, even though he's from Earth 14412. Now, I'm not sure if Thor developed some ability to travel to other realities, but old King Thor has suggested a few times before that if 616 Thor were to die, he would too. So there may not be any comparison since they're kind of the same dude. Just one is a lot older and arguably more badass looking. At number 3 is Jane Foster. This version of Thor has one of the most intriguing backstories on the list. Jane Foster is just an average mortal from Earth 616 who basically discovers that she's capable of lifting Mjolnir. The way this happens is that Jane gets a job as a nurse and befriends Thor, who is in his human form, resembling a rather frail doctor named Donald Blake, but eventually he reveals his true identity to Jane as well as confessing his love for her. She then becomes the first mortal that has ever been brought to Asgard, but when she's endowed with Asgardian powers, she becomes overwhelmed by the responsibilities, and so Odin deems her not ready for the task, sending her back to Earth and wiping her memory. But once again, years down the line, she reunites with Donald Blake, aka Thor, and they fall in love once again, but only after a pretty rocky reunion. She's then tragically diagnosed with cancer, the illness that killed her mother when she was only 9 years old. And fast forwarding a bit, Thor is battling on Earth's moon when he realizes that he has lost his ability to wield Mjolnir, and when the hammer begins to call to Jane, she soon learns that she is meant to become the new Thor. The hammer seeks her out telepathically and she travels to find it on the moon. When she successfully lifts it, she transforms into a powerful goddess. Well, she transforms into Thor, and her health immediately increases as well as her physical appearance. She then goes on to be a really powerful and impressive version of Thor and even sacrifices herself at one point for Asgard, but is revived by Odin for her heroism. This is just such a cool and satisfying story of a Thor finding her way, starting as a mortal and becoming one of the most powerful gods in the cosmos. And despite all the bad hands dealt to her by life too. At number 2, we've got Thor-El, which you can maybe guess is basically a combination of Superman and Thor. One interesting thing about this guy off the bat is that he's blue. This is because when the two characters merge, Superman is in his blue energy form, and this merge that I mentioned is referring to the Ultimate Access crossover from the 90s. During this series, Marvel and DC laid down their feud to give fans a really interesting look into a world where Marvel and DC characters have both merged. And what a great combination to see merged into one, Superman and Thor. This is almost an unfair marriage of abilities, which makes probably one of the most powerful Thors on this list, actually arguably the most powerful, that is, if the number 1 spot on the list wasn't a thing. I know his accolades might not be the most extensive given the extremely short run of the character. In fact, he only really exists for about half an issue, but I really don't think the character should be written off due to his brevity. This list is about the value of a character in relation to the original Thor we're used to, and just adding Superman to an already powerful and extremely impressive hero, there's no question that this one has a leg up on Thor 616. At number 1, we've got Old Phoenix King Thor, or King Phoenix God of Fire. And if you're already pretty sure what this variant is all about, you're probably right, because the name is pretty self-explanatory. He's Old King Thor, having been overtaken by the Phoenix Force. In 2018's Thor Volume 5 Issue 6, Thor is facing off against Dr. Doom in a distant future, when he also encounters a Phoenix-possessed Wolverine, who is basically a walking, flaming adamantium skeleton at that point. And only when Wolverine reaches to grab Thor's hammer does he basically explode and disappear and pass on the Phoenix Force to Mjolnir, which just leaves Old King Thor and Dr. Doom to face off. But this isn't any ordinary Dr. Doom, it's a Dr. Doom endowed with the powers of the Iron Fist, Starbrand, Doctor Strange, and Ghost Rider all in one. And with the prosperity of Earth on the line, Old King Thor knows that he has to act fast not to end up overpowered by his supercharged Dr. Doom variant. So he makes the bold move of grabbing the hammer and allowing himself to be overtaken by Phoenix Force. With Old King Thor being one of the most powerful versions on the list, this variant instantly becomes hands down the most powerful we've ever seen.
see.
Number 10. Jim Gordon. Jim Gordon ended up being recruited as a new Batman after the fallout of Endgame in the comics. Jim wasn't really in a great place to be commissioner, as he had just recovered from the effects of Joker venom, which had left him unhinged and violent, initially trying to kill his friend Batman. But at the same time, he was also still someone that the government and the police saw as being extremely useful. He had years of service under his belt, he knew Gotham like the back of his hand, and with Batman and Joker both believed to be dead, Gotham and its people were looking for a new man to take up the Batman mantle. Enter Jim Gordon. The government gave him training, muscle implants, and a new tech-based armor mech suit that also happened to have at least semi-sentience. Jim named the suit Rookie and would both wear and work alongside it, in tandem with the police and government as a new, weirdly svelte Batman. That suit was tight. Of course, you could argue that Jim wasn't great as Batman, considering when Bruce returned, he kinda had some messes to clean up. But as a Batman who worked with the law and had a more intimate understanding of the justice system, it could also be argued that Gordon, in his own way, was better. Number 9. Azrael. Depending on your opinion of how best to deal with criminals, there are some who think Azrael did a bang-up job as Batman and even would like to see him return to the mantle. Azrael ended up acting as Batman after Bruce Wayne had his back broken by Bane. Batman ends up leaving Jean-Paul Valley in charge while he works on healing up and recovering. At first, Azrael seemed like a pretty good replacement, but he quickly gets wrapped up in his mission to bring criminals to justice. Azrael is considered to be more brutal and violent than Batman, going so far as to even kill criminals who oppose him and not backing down when Bruce finally returns to take the Batman mantle back. Bruce even has to call in backup from his Robins to take down Azrael in the end. While Jean-Paul was definitely a different kind of Batman, he was a kind of different that some prefer. Number 8. Damian Wayne. And if you like supers who are not afraid to kill, do I have a Batman for you. Damian Wayne in the alternate future that is Earth 666 ends up becoming Batman after the current Batman, Dick Grayson, is killed by exploding Jokerfish. With Grayson dead, Damian believes that the only way to fight against crime is to go to extremes, believing that killing is the only way. Needless to say, this stance creates a lot more problems for Gotham, and especially for Commissioner Barbara Gordon, who becomes kind of a sworn enemy to Batman. In the end, Damian as Batman does bring about the destruction of Gotham and possibly the destruction of the world, but in a way, he was still super successful in what he set out to do. Damian created a bargain with the devil, trading his soul in exchange for becoming the eternal protector of Gotham, which is what happened. Of course, as with any wish or deal with the devil, there's always a twist. And in this case, the twist is that Gotham ends up being destroyed due to a nuclear strike. Still, Damian does protect Gotham till the very end of its existence. What more can you ask from Batman? Other than to, I guess not let Gotham be destroyed, which is a fair ask, I suppose. Number 7. Elliot Ness. Elliot Ness becomes the Batman in the Elseworld story Batman Scar of the Bat from 1996. The reason why I think Elliot Ness makes a better Batman than Bruce Wayne? Well, because he's based on a real-world character who actually fought to stop criminals in Chicago during the Prohibition era. He was a special agent who was known for taking down Al Capone with the help of his fellow law enforcement team, who were known as the Untouchables. In Scar of the Bat, we see Elliot Ness as a 1920s version of Batman, supposedly the one who inspired the character from the comics. Ooh, at least in this version of the story. When Elliot Ness finds he can't do enough within the limits of the law, he becomes a vigilante, taking up the mantle Batman because he fights crime sometimes with a bat. In turn, this weapon is chosen by Ness as Batman to scare criminals like Al Capone, who himself was known for beating those who betrayed him to death with a baseball bat. That's a scene that happens at the beginning of this comic. In the end, Elliot wins the day and hangs up the Batman mantle, allowing one of his colleagues who is on his deathbed to claim to have been Batman so as not to besmirch Ness's name and ensure that the criminals get booked the proper way. Basically avoiding any hearsay, because if you're a vigilante and you try to take someone for justice, people won't be like, but you're a criminal, so it's all thrown out. One of those things. After recounting the truth to his biographer years later, Elliot Ness seemingly dies in his sleep due to a heart failure at his kitchen table, which I believe is the actual way that Elliot Ness died in history. So yeah, I like stories where characters get to be heroes from history, because I like history. Number 6. Jace Fox, aka Timothy Call Me Jace Fox, the son of Lucius Fox and Tanya Fox and brother to Tiffany, Tam, and Luke Fox. This might be a hot take, but I would argue that Jace was a better Batman because he chose to step up to the plate at a time when Bruce Wayne basically couldn't be Batman. So at that time period, he was better since Bruce wasn't even Batman, but was instead the Dark Detective, having to operate, well, more in the dark, due to being a super wanted criminal. However, Jace saw the importance of the symbol of Batman and decided to take take up the mantle in Bruce's place, despite the danger. He might not have as much experience as Batman, but he definitely comes with his own skill set and training backing him up. Jace's Batman in Future State also has access to future tech that current and past Bruce doesn't, because Future State. Number 5. Helena Wayne. While Helena Wayne might not even exist in the main continuity, at least not yet, although she's definitely been there before, that hasn't held her back from being one of the most extraordinary and capable Bat family members from the multiverse. On Earth 2, or one of the Earth 2s, because there's kind of 2 Earth 2s, Helena ends up taking up the mantle of her father, becoming the new Batman. She wears colors similar to Batwoman, red and black, but decides to keep the mantle as is, as opposed to changing it to match her own gender identity. Helena lives up to the name too, and while we don't get to see too much of her in terms of her capability, just knowing Helena Wayne from the comics and from both Earth 2s, I can imagine she would not only do her father proud, but also potentially end up surpassing him in terms of her capabilities, having learned herself from the best. This version of Helena also trained under Bruce as his Robin and was there with him when he died, doing her best to defend her father before the building that he was in exploded. Number 4. Dick Grayson. Dick Grayson was Batman's first Robin and would end up taking up the mantle of Batman after Bruce Wayne's supposed death at the hands of Darkseid. In reality, Batman wasn't dead, but had simply kind of been blasted through time. Dick did such a good job with the mantle that even when Batman was revealed to have survived the events of Final Crisis and he returned, he actually didn't make Dick hang up the cape and cowl. Instead, in the one-shot Batman the Return, Bruce asks Dick to stay on and operate as Batman in Gotham in his stead, while he heads out to manage Batman Incorporated, which was pretty cool. I feel like you know you did a good job as Batman when you get the stamp of approval from Bruce, which is definitely what Dick got as Batman and what Damian got working as Grayson's Robin. And you definitely are considered to be trusted when Bruce gives you Gotham to look after, which is definitely the city closest to his own heart. Number 3. Superman. When Superman ended up swapping powers or lack thereof with Batman in 2003's Superman/Batman, Superman proved to be the one who was better. Batman with Superman's powers ended up kinda losing his grip on reality. He believed that he could hear his parents' voices and became super violent in his fight for justice. The other heroes of Earth attempted to convince Batman to swap back his powers with Clark and let him help them, but he refused. In the end, it was up to Superman as Batman to stop him, which, even without powers, he did. He ended up luring him back to Earth and employing the help of fellow colleague, friend, and hero Zatanna. While Zatanna is the one behind luring Batman to Earth with illusions of his parents and is the one who reverses the swap, in the end even Bruce admits that Superman did a great job as him, suggesting that the swap was about more than powers, as Superman behaved and acted just as Bruce would have in his position, and did whatever it took, putting himself in danger to ensure the world was safe. Number 2. Batman 1,000,000. Batman 1,000,000 is of course from the future, way in the future. He hails from the alternate future known as DC 1,000,000, coming from year 85,300. That's right, 85,300. What a year. There he guards the galaxy's most dangerous criminals who are held within a prison on Pluto. This Batman's identity is unknown to us, but we do know a bit of his backstory. He was one of the thousands of victims who was forced as a kid to watch the death of his parents at the hands of villain Zaron, while others were driven to madness or took their own life. This hero instead was inspired to make sure an act like this never happened again, taking up the mantle of Batman. Batman 1,000,000 being from the future has a unique physiology which grants him superhuman abilities such as telepathy. He also has future tech, and off the charts IQ of over 1,000, not actually possible if you know how IQs work, and was one of the heroes who helped to save the Earth from the traitor Starman and the plague that he had unleashed. Number 1. Terry McGinnis. What would this list be without Terry McGinnis? As Batman's direct protege in the future, Terry definitely deserves our number 1 spot, I think. He also was designed to be the next Batman, and so not only has the training and experience needed, learning from an older and wiser Bruce Wayne himself, but also genetically was made to become the best Batman possible. In fact, you could even argue because he grew up with his parents still alive that he might be a more whole Batman. Terry was the product of Project Batman Beyond, headed by Amanda Waller, who actually snuck Bruce Wayne's DNA into his conception with nanotech that would basically rewrite Terry's dad's genetic code to match Bruce's, making Terry, in a weird way, kinda Bruce's son / half clone. Waller hired Phantasm, aka Andrea Beaumont, to then kill Terry's parents after they left the movie theater with their son, trying to also orchestrate the same origin story for Terry to help motivate him to become a hero. However, in the end, Andrea refused to go through with it, and so Terry got to live his life with his parents, alive. Although it should be noted, his parents parents did end up getting divorced, giving Terry a different kind of struggle in life. Also, although his father wouldn't end up being assassinated by Beaumont at that time, he would later on die tragically, so still has tragedy in his past. He's a hero. All heroes, I feel like, have tragedy in their past at some point. Number 10. Oliver Queen. During the Elseworlds story in CW's Arrowverse, we learned that Oliver Queen and the Flash have swapped bodies, or rather roles. Everyone seems to think that Oliver is Barry and that Barry is Oliver. Initially, although both heroes struggled to fit into the other's role, eventually the two are able to figure out what makes the other such a great hero and channel some of their energy. Oliver himself struggles as the Flash, but even when he's running into walls and misfiring Speed Force lightning, he still manages at least to catch the bad guy, which is pretty impressive. Even when he's doing a bad job, it's not that bad. And after Barry takes him under his wing, he actually becomes a pretty decent Flash by the end of the storyline. Considering how many people love Oliver Queen when it comes to the Arrowverse, with him being sort of the ultimate main character, because, you know, it's the Arrowverse, it wouldn't surprise me if people preferred that Queen remain the Flash, as then he'd get cool super speed powers permanently. Number 9. The Accelerated Man. From CW's Arrowverse in The Flash, we hear of an alternate version of the character from Earth 19. We don't have too much information on this alternate version of the Flash, but it has been suggested that they are a speedster who instead goes by the name the Accelerated Man. Earth 19's H.R. Wells, the alternate version of Star Labs director, founder, and lead scientist Harrison Wells, claims that he played a key role in helping the Accelerated Man to capture all of the metahuman criminals from their world at once, which honestly sounds pretty impressive. The Accelerated Man is also a speedster from the comics who hails from Earth 19, although that version of the character is a little bit different, though they do look pretty similar to the CW version. Number 8. Iris West II. Iris currently goes by the name Impulse in the comics. She is the daughter of Wally West and Linda Park, who initially was lost when the New 52 started up. However, her dad remembered her existence and the family he had once had from the previous continuity, and he would end up seeking out Iris and her twin brother Jay. In the previous continuity, it was suggested that Iris could even grow up to become faster than her dad, Wally West, who is known for being one of the fastest speedsters of all time. So that's pretty impressive. However, in the current continuity, I don't think this has been established as something that could happen in Iris's future. However, we do know in Iris's future that she could go on to live to do her father, the Flash, proud, and while not an explicit version of the Flash, we have seen into a future in issue 771 of the Flash, where she goes on to become the new Kid Flash. And because I love Iris so much, I'm gonna count it because I just love her as a character. Number 7. Eobard Thawne. I know what you're thinking, hey, but isn't Eobard Thawne known as a villain and the Reverse Flash? In the main continuity, yes, but in the Dark Multiverse Flashpoint story, Eobard actually becomes the Flash, and what's more, he kinda becomes a hero as well. A dark, twisted, and messed up hero, hellbent on eradicating competing heroes of that universe, but a hero nonetheless. He succeeds in defeating Barry Allen and Flashpoint Batman, aka Thomas Wayne, and then sets out to change the world, shaping it into his version of perfect. This involves preventing Batman from ever becoming Batman and instead creating his own superhero team. Number 6. Impulse. Okay, so Impulse isn't really the Flash. He's more associated with the Kid Flash name than the main Flash name, though he did at one point dress up as the Flash in order to buy time for Wally. Unfortunately, his very brief time impersonating the Flash wearing the costume was cut very short, as at this time Bart was without his powers and ended up being killed. Of course, this was still a very moving story involving Bart, who is probably the most loved member of the Flash family, with really only Iris and Jay West offering any potential competition there, in my opinion. Those two are a couple of super lovable cuties as Wally and Linda's kids. Also, despite being young, Bart Allen is still super powerful when he is powered. He can time travel, hop dimensions, has been shown to be fast enough to fend off and even beat Godspeed, and he can phase. Number 5. Jess Chambers. Jess Chambers is the Flash from Earth 11, who in Future State ended up moving to Earth 0, heading there to help at first but deciding to stay on Earth 0 permanently. They ended up joining the Future Justice League, and while working alongside their teammates, we saw Jess do something pretty cool. Something I'm not sure I've ever seen another Flash do before, but if you have, I guess let me know in the comments. The Justice League seem to be trapped in another world by the White Martians, who have taken their place and aim to conquer Earth 0. Flash uses their Speed Force senses to determine, based on the vibration of the Earth that they are on, that it's not actually the Justice League's homeworld, it's not Earth 0. In order to take the League home, Jess then shares their power with their teammates, also granting them a connection to the Speed Force and Super Speed temporarily, allowing them to travel through the multiverse together and all return home. Also, for those wondering, Earth Zero is the number for future states, reality, and Earth. Number 4. Jay Garrick. Jay Garrick was the first Flash. He actually gained his superpowers from his own experiments. He might not have been the fastest Flash initially, considering that he could travel near the speed of light, which in retrospect now isn't actually that fast compared to some other Flashes, but back in the day that was considered to be pretty impressive. Before we got as crazy as being able to duplicate yourself with the Speed Force and travel back and forth through time, Jay was also known for being a brilliant scientist. He has even been called on in the past in the original comic series to use his scientific skills to help save the world. And when it comes to making all the right calls, Jay is definitely one of the wisest Flashes that we have in the comics, as he has the most experience. Jay is also one of the best Flashes because, well, he doesn't really overstay his welcome. He ended up retiring as the Flash, but would still make appearances here and there when he was needed, which honestly I think is the best you can do, because as a Flash you kinda can go back into the Speed Force and pop back out again, but you don't need to stay forever. Unlike some Flashes. Looking at you, Barry. Number 3. Red Racer. While his existence in the comics was a bit short-lived, Red Racer is definitely one of the coolest Flashes that we've ever got to meet. He was not just a science nerd like so many of the Flashes are, but was also a comic book nerd. The best kind? I think so. He made sure to get President Superman of Earth 23 to sign his Superman comic upon meeting him. Red Racer is the fastest man alive on Earth 36 and part of that world's Justice 9 team. He ended up joining a multiversal sort of Justice League that included Earth 23's Superman, Earth 11's Aquawoman, and Captain Carrot of Earth 26. This team is known as Justice Incarnate in the comics. Red Racer also did not hesitate when he had to give up his life in order to save others, and he also proved how intelligent he was at that time when he rapidly built a receiver version of Ultima Thule, a sort of interdimensional spaceship that is made out of frozen music. Doing so cost him his life, but enabled the rest of his teammates to save the day. Oh, and he also did it really fast, and it's supposed to be a thing that takes thousands of years. And I'm pretty sure he also did it without any blueprint. He just was like, yeah, I'll just build it. I'll die, but I got you guys. So cool, what a hero. Number 2, Red Death. Because Batman basically does everything better, including being the Flash. Or well, this is the Dark Multiverse and the Dark Knights, so I guess I should say he does it the worst in terms of him being a bad guy, but he also does it the best in terms of what he is capable of. Bruce Wayne as the Dark Multiverse Flash, the Red Death, can actually use his Speed Force powers to create constructs. If you are struck with one of these bat-like constructs, you'll end up withering to the point of death, aging thousands of years almost instantly. So this is probably the most deadly version of the Flash that we've ever seen in the comics. Red Death hails from Negative Earth 52, back when there were negative Earths and we had a dark multiverse. RIP Dark Multiverse. Number 1, Wally West. Obviously, who is one of the best Flashes around? None other than Wally West, the once new version of the Flash everyone fell in love with and then were deprived of for years. However, Wally is back now, and not in a way where he's forced to be a villain or to be miserable. He actually gets to be a hero and be happy in the comics, which is really all most Wally fans have wanted for him and his family this whole time. Wally West is the nephew of Iris West and therefore by marriage Barry Allen. For a time, Wally operated as Barry's sidekick, Kid Flash, but would eventually become a hero all his own. Wally is considered to be one of the fastest Flashes to have ever existed, and he also seems to have learned somewhat from Barry's and the other Flash's mistakes in the past, making him sometimes a little bit wiser by comparison. At least a bit wiser than Barry.